Well, welcome to today's webinar on the phases of multi-site expansion. I'm Sean Bublitz, the Managing Director here at the Unstuck Group. And before we get started, I want to introduce you to the panelists that I have here with me today. First of all, I have Paul Alexander. If you've been following with the Unstuck Group for a while, you probably heard Paul's name. He's been a member of our consulting team since the very beginning of the Unstuck Group and one of our leadership cohort facilitators. He's joined us on the podcast several times and has been on many of our multi-site webinars. He's also going to be helping me host our very first campus pastor cohort that launches this fall in beautiful Phoenix, Arizona. So we're looking forward to that. But Paul, other than all of that setup, will you give our attenders today a little more on your background, specifically around multi-site?
Yeah, Sean, thanks for having me. Glad to be on the webinar with everyone. Yeah, 30 years of full-time local church ministry experience. So 25 years have been mega church. The last 15 have been as the executive pastor at Sun Valley. It's a large multi-site church located in the Phoenix metro area. So these phases of multi-site we're talking about, from 1 to 3 and then 4 to 6 and then past 6 on, we've kind of journeyed through all that stuff on the ground here. So it should be a fun conversation.
And then also joining us is Jesse Tink. Jesse has been at the Unstuck Group here and on our team for the last 9 years. He has been an instrumental part of helping us create this multi-site offering and the consulting process and coaching we do for churches. Jesse's also going to be facilitating a leadership cohort on multi-site with me this fall. That leadership cohort kicks off in Charlotte, North Carolina. So if you find yourself on the eastern side of the United States, this is a great cohort for you to join. So Jesse, wonder if you'd tell us a little bit about yourself, your role at your church, Prairie Lakes, and kind of your multi-site journey.
Yeah, I'm the lead pastor at Prairie Lakes. We are a 7-campus multi-site church in the great state of Iowa. And I've been here for 20 years now in various roles.
Wow.
Yeah. So excited to be a part of things today and certainly privileged. Looking forward to hosting some pastors in the fall.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wanted you guys to be on this webinar today because, as we work with multi-site churches all across North America, the two of you have by far the most experience of being on the ground with multi-site churches, seeing what we're going to talk about today really play out. And here's why we decided on this conversation and this topic for right now. I think there's been a missing conversation out there when it comes to the topic of the different phases of multi-site. There's a lot of conversation out there related to the different ways to do multi-site, but not a lot about the phases. We started actually talking about this on the Unstuck Church podcast back in episode 448. But each phase brings a new set of challenges. What works at 2 locations won't work at 5 locations. And early multi-site model decisions can really impact your future ability to launch other additional campuses. Many churches feel multi-stuck because their leadership and systems that worked early on weren't really designed for the complexity that they're navigating now as their multi-site journey has continued. So today we want to walk you through a simple framework that changes at each stage, what the specific changes that play out there, what typically breaks down in each model and each phase of the multi-site journey, and then also what to prioritize next. Healthy, expanding multi-site churches have to learn to kind of play the movie forward. Not just thinking about the next move, that one next move that's right in front of them, but really kind of a master plan, having that in place to filter near-term decisions so that they could be in a healthy place long-term. It's kind of the both and. You need a plan for your desired future and to, as Paul says, act your age in each phase of the multi-site journey. So as we go through all of this, here's the decision we want to help you make today. We want to help you to learn to act your age as a multi-site church and identify one key next step you need to take to do that. We want to equip you to use that next phase you're moving into to guide you into what to prioritize instead of trying to solve everything all at once. So we're going to walk through today's conversation in 4 specific phases. The first phase we're going to talk about is the launch phase. And of course, these are churches that are going multi-site for the first time. This concept, this model, this strategy, it's all brand new to them. So they've got to uncover a lot of what they don't know about what they don't know. The second phase is what we call the momentum phase of multi-site. This is where churches go to 2 or 3 locations. The third phase is what we call strategic growth. That's 4 to 6 locations. And then the last phase we'll talk about today is what we call consolidation. We'll explain more about that later. And that is when churches get to 7, 8, 9 locations and then also beyond. They're really learning to scale up beyond that. Before we get into that, though, and we're almost there to the content, but a few other details. You can use the chat and live Q&A functions in Zoom to have the conversation with us today. Chat is just for ongoing conversation about what we're covering during the webinar. The live Q&A will be for you to submit questions to us, and we'll try to answer those directly as we work through today's content. If you haven't yet, you can download the companion workbook that we've created to go with today's conversation. You can get it for free if you go to the unstuckgroup.com/workbook. And then if you'd like to share the conversation on social media with us today, you can go to X or Facebook and just use the hashtag UnstuckChurch. All right, so let's get into the first phase of the multi-site journey, what we call the launch phase. Paul, we did a survey recently and found that about half of the churches over 1,000 in attendance are considering multi-site right now. And honestly, with the cost of construction, that number's probably not going down anytime soon. Churches are just looking at it's going to cost us millions and millions to build a new building. Maybe it's better stewardship for us to actually start a new location. So there are a lot of churches asking the question, how do we actually do this? How do we specifically jump from being a 1-location church to now 2 locations? So what does that launch phase actually look like for churches? And then I wonder if you could describe some of the landmines that churches need to be aware of when they start out on their multi-site journey.
Yeah, okay, Sean. So a couple of landmines that I see commonly as churches are eager to go multi-site and start their first location is actually treating multi-site like a church plant. Mm-hmm. They are not the same thing. That might sound obvious, but let me unpack this for a second. I often see churches try to multi-site for the first time, and their original location, like you said, is 1,000 plus people in attendance. Yeah. They have multiple worship services. They have momentum. And so they try to start a new campus, and they send about 100 people out or so into a setup and tear down situation, and it stalls out quickly. And they're like, we don't know why. Because a church of 1,000 in attendance with multiple services with momentum and a church of 100 doing setup and tear down in a school, they're not the same thing. They're different things. They don't look the same. They don't feel the same. They don't behave the same. They're different churches. Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes I find leaders so eager to start a new campus, they're entrepreneurial, they want to reach new people for Jesus, that they actually start something that actually doesn't feel anything like the original location. Mm-hmm. And so they get up in front of their church, they cast vision to go to the new location because they're good leaders and they've built trust, and they leverage that trust to lead people to this new location to reach new people. And they go, and then they come right back to the original location the next week, and they're like, that doesn't feel like us. That doesn't smell like us. That doesn't behave. It's not the same church. And so as a result, church leaders, if they don't do this right, they can actually lose trust with their church. Mm. And we don't want that for church leaders. So I think one of the things church leaders need to do with their senior leadership team is just be brutally honest with one another and have a real candid, honest conversation. Like, what's the irreducible minimum size and experience that the new location needs to have to truly feel like your church? Mm-hmm. And frankly, we could have a whole conversation just unpacking that principle, but that's a really good starting point for a senior leadership team to start talking about this conversation. And then another one I've seen happen, this idea of people carry culture, ministry environments, programs, and strategies actually support it. So here what I mean, I've seen a lot of churches hire new staff in from the outside to launch a new location. And that decision is destined for pain. Mm. So it's not uncommon, like, hey, we're starting a new location, so we need to hire a new campus pastor. We need to hire a new whatever staff member to go start that. Think this with me. It's not reasonable to hire from the outside of your church and expect that person to go replicate the culture of your church in a new location. because they haven't been a part of it, right? They don't get your culture yet. So instead think through transferring existing staff to the new location so they can carry your culture with you, and then hire new people into an existing strong culture, campus that's healthy, doing a great job, backfill those vacancies that you create. So that may sound like an obvious thing to everybody in the room, but working with multi-site churches as long as I have, I've found it's not quite so obvious.
Yeah.
And then finally, again, this may be simple, but I want to make sure when you're starting this conversation and this journey, these are the right kinds of things to be talking about. Like, do we actually know what we're replicating? Do we know what's working at our original location? And I love every pastor on this call, but the answer can't be there's just something special about this place.
Yeah.
It can't be the Lord's just blessing us. I'm glad your church is special, and I'm glad the Lord's blessing me. But do you know what's special about your church? Do you know what the Lord is blessing? Because are you clear about your reach strategies and your discipleship strategies? Can you articulate them and replicate them and make them portable to replicate them in a new location? Because if you don't provide clarity on the front end, all your leaders at that new location, they want to reach new people for Jesus. So if you don't provide clarity, they're going to provide it. And it's possible that small little degrees of difference early in this journey between these two locations actually end up leading you to being two different churches in the long run, because you behave just slightly different over a long period of time. It's always easier to give rope than to take rope back, and way less painful. So I think on the front end, be cautious how much rope you give, and make sure you get really clear on the sandbox and what you're replicating.
Man, that is so good. Those three are home runs right there, Paul. And we have what you were describing there at the end, some of those churches that have felt that pain of giving too much autonomy early on. We've worked with some of those over the last year or two, and they've actually had to unmultisite and recalibrate their strategy again and restart. And nobody wants to unintentionally church plant, right? We see wins happen and wins come out of that, but it wasn't an intentional strategy. And so going in eyes wide open with these three things that you've mentioned already will help leaders avoid that pain in the future. Jesse, from your experience, I'm just curious, what are maybe 2 or 3 things that you wish leaders would make sure that they get right before they launch that first location?
Yeah, I'd say the most important, and it's kind of related to where Paul started, but the most important, I think, is being clear on your why. When you're in the launch phase, a lot of times that the thing that kind of catalyzes you to explore the idea of a second campus or launching a second location is growth. We're experiencing growth. We're out of capacity. We got to do something. And that's a great catalyst. It's just not a very good reason. Ultimately, so if your why is something like, hey, we have to reach a different part of our community more effectively than we're able to do right now. If your why is part of the vision, 3, 5, 10-year vision for the churches, multiple locations, those are much better reasons to do it. Even if growth is the thing that is like causing you to look at this, it's not a sufficient reason to do it. And what I'll see a lot of times, Paul uses the idea of you can't treat a multi-site like a church plant. I would I hear the word satellite used a lot from churches at this phase who are only thinking about multi-site in terms of like creating margin or let's just go over to the high school or let's go over to some church that doesn't look or feel like ours. Let's find some building and we can just throw people over there. You can explore that as a strategy. That's just not a multi-site strategy. And we would say pretty confidently that's not going to work. It's not a really good why. So you got to really know why, number one. Number two, and I know this is a really self supporting thing to say as a consultant, okay? But I'm going to say you really need to know your plan. And a lot of times when you've never done it before, it's a really wise idea to have someone help you create that plan. As you're exploring the idea of a second location, if you start just talking to any number of churches who are either exploring or even that have done this, sometimes you'll hear this sentiment, there's a million different ways to do multi-site. And that's true, 100% true. There are a million different ways to do it. What's not true is that there's a million different ways to do it in a healthy and predictably successful way. Right. There's only a few, maybe one or two ways to do that, at least from our experience. And that really does involve taking the time to have a good plan of how you're going to launch. So this plan should include multi-site readiness. Do we have healthy and replicable ministries? It should include, what's our multi-site model going to be? How are we going to deliver ministry across multiple locations? It should include your launch strategies. How are you going to evaluate what a good second location might be? How are we going to be operationally ready from a finance and HR and IT standpoint, all this boring stuff, right? But then even your launch plan, you probably should have a project with different phases that will help you figure out what you need to have ready prior to public launch. So I would say a plan is really important, number two. And then finally, this might sound weird. I know I've been on site with churches that are in this phase, and they've hired the Unstuck group to come help. And then I'll kind of discover, sometimes in real time, there's not adequate buy-in around going multi-site. Maybe it's something that the lead pastor is super excited about, or the executive pastor came from a multi-site church, and this is kind of a thing. But then you discover half the room is either unaware or they don't know really what this entails. And a lot of times even, multi-site as a strategy has been around a long time now, 25, 30 years, really in the mainstream. Yeah. You get a lot of church staffers that came from an unhealthy multi-site church. And the last thing they want to do is go and repeat that experience at their current church. And so you really do, prior to going, you really should spend some time getting buy-in to using it and considering it as a strategy.
100% agree, Jesse. And we just talked about on the podcast the fact that there are lots of ideas of models out there, and we tend to pick and choose just the latest model that we've heard about that worked at so-and-so's church, rather than really looking at what's unique about our church, what's unique about our mission field. How do we design our multi-site strategy, which there aren't a million different ways to do right with, in a way that actually helps us reach that mission field. So completely agree with that. Paul, I'm curious, we have a lot of churches that contact us and they're growing and they're trying to make a call between, should we add a service or launch a campus? How do we know when it's the right time to scale up in those different ways? How do you respond to that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's a little bit of science to this, but there's also some art. I'm going to try to hit on both sides of that here. First of all, understanding they're different strategies. Okay, so adding a new service is a strategy to create capacity and maximize space at an existing location, right? We need to add a second service, a third service, a fourth service, a fifth service, however many we feel like we need to add and can still be effective in reaching new people. It's always going to be cheaper to add a new service than build a new building or start a new campus.
Right.
That's just a fact.
Yeah.
But launching a new campus is different than adding a new service. It's a strategy to actually reach new people in a new place. Okay, so you're building a new venue. When you're thinking that through, I want to come back to something we're actually quite prescriptive with churches to think through before they start their first location, and that's a very healthy benchmark starting point. So you used that stat earlier that half of churches over 1,000 are considering multi-site as their next strategic move to reach new people, and that's kind of the floor that we would encourage churches to get to. Can we get to 1,000 people in multiple services at our original location before we begin considering starting in another location in another place? Because if we can't do multiple services in one location, it's probably pretty naive of us to think we can do multiple services in multiple locations. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
So let's get to multiple services before we get to multiple locations. Now, I also understand, and I got just incredible amount of respect for what Jesse's doing. He's really cracked the nut on rural multi-site in Iowa. There's a lot that the Church of America can learn from what he's doing, candidly. But not every church is in a large Phoenix metro area like where I'm at, where you're going to get to 1,000 people. Your community, a very large church, maybe 500 to 750. So there's some contextualization to what I'm saying, but you got to be intellectually honest about it as well. So the reason we say 1,000 is because that gives you the ability to start a new location from a position of strength. You can actually send out a core team from your original location, and it doesn't cripple the sending location. Okay. Like when it comes to sending volunteers, leaders, staff, and people who are all in with you and giving. And then finally, I would say this, the best reason to start a new location is because you have to, because you're growing and you're out of space. And this is where the art to this all comes in. You may already be doing like 3 services on a Sunday morning and growing at a rate that you're going to be in a turnaway situation in a year or two.
Yeah.
In that case, you may not want to start a new service just yet. So people actually feel the space constraint and the natural need to start a new location. Because there's nothing worse than getting up on stage and say, we're called to start a new location and reach new people in this new place. And people are looking around and the room's like halfway full and they're like, why are we doing this? Momentum's really about how the room feels. And so there may be moments artistically as a leader, you're like, no, we're gonna push the brakes and not start a new service. So that way the room feels the need to start a new location. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely does. I'm thinking about a church that I was working with a couple of months ago, and they were considering Multisite for the first time and be launching their first location. And their room, their services are absolutely packed. I mean, back to the back wall, people with their back against the wall, every service that they have. And in that environment, it would not be hard to cast the vision for Multisite, right? You turn to your neighbor, you turn to your other neighbor, you're shoulder to shoulder, and you get it. It's like, yeah, we need more space. We've got no more room to grow. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right. So we're going to wrap up this first phase of Multisite and move on. But before we do, I want to give you about 60 seconds to get that workbook that you just downloaded and reflect back to when you first launched as a Multisite church. If you're Multisite for the very first time and or if you went Multisite, I'm sorry, and you first launched, take a second and ask what caused you the most anxiety about this strategy in the very beginning. Or if you haven't launched yet, if you're leaning into this conversation we're having because you're considering it, and you're thinking about a brand new Multisite location, answer that question for what anxieties you're currently experiencing thinking about going into this. Okay, so we'll give you about 60 seconds and then we're back with phase 2, the momentum phase of Multisite. Jesse, so now we're talking about churches that are at that 2 or 3 location point in their Multisite journey. So what changes when a church moves into this kind of momentum phase with 2 or 3 locations? Where do you see things typically break down once a Multisite church gets to this stage?
Yeah, I think this is probably still true. And if it isn't, let's just say that it is.
Okay.
But it used to be, I think, that churches that go Multisite, they launch their 3rd location, and most of them kind of stop there. And it's because of the complexity that being 2 and 3 locations really puts on your radar.
Yeah.
So there's a lot that can kind of happen in this phase that can cause a church to get stuck, and let's just kind of capture it. Obviously prior to going Multisite, your staff, for the most part, I mean, they have multiple responsibilities, but everybody has a title. They're wearing one hat. I'm the pastor of groups, I'm the pastor of kids, I'm a worship pastor, whatever. But then you launch the 2nd and maybe 3rd location, and then what you see is a lot of people start wearing 2 hats, 2 roles, 2 titles. They maintain a responsibility at one campus, the original campus, the sending campus, or the next location. And then a lot of them also take on like a central strategist role. So they're providing support across multiple locations. For example, right? A lot of times, the campus pastor at your 2nd location might be your discipleship pastor at your first location, and you're going to want him to continue to be the discipleship pastor across multiple locations, right? That's just kind of what you see at this phase. You see two hats, and if you represent that on an org chart, it looks like a matrix. It's a matrix organizational structure, right? So again, if you're a children's pastor, you have a solid line to whoever you're reporting to at your campus. Might be an executive, or it might be a family pastor, or whatever. But maybe you're also a central strategist, and your dotted line providing support to your counterparts across locations. You take direction from your boss. That's where authority and accountability comes from. But you're supporting, coaching, influencing across locations. That's where alignment comes from. And so a lot of times, here's what we see kind of breaking down in this phase. Instead of just wearing two hats, which is complex in and of itself, sometimes people wear 3 and 4. And that's usually because they didn't start just by wearing one hat. They were kind of the discipleship person. They were also kind of the guest services person, and they dabbled in teaching and maybe supported missions. and they're kind of doing multiple things. And then you actually have not just two hats, but you're kind of campus and kind of central in a lot of different dimensions. And then here's what that usually leads to, because multiple locations scale, generally speaking, just it's like a stress test. It just creates a lot more pressure. And so this person's going to feel pressure. I can't get all the work done. I've got all these hats, all these responsibilities. You know what I need? I need a part-time staffer to help me out.
Yeah.
And then you can very easily in this phase just have a lot of like holes you're kind of plugging with part-time staffers all over the place. And it can become very easily a season where everybody feels like we're understaffed. We don't have enough help. We need to hire more and hire more and hire more. And in reality, you're either overstaffed or you just have so much complexity in your multi-site structure and model that you're staffing to it rather than developing a volunteer bench and hiring people who can multiply their capacity by empowering and developing other leaders. So we'll see that. That's a big breakdown in this, and can get away from you really quickly.
Jesse, this reminds me, this is where we start to see that churches, they are the understaffed church with too many people.
Right. Is
the best way to describe it. And it's interesting how many churches actually resonate with that phrase. That's exactly how they feel. Yeah.
Yeah. How many churches do you, navigate with who've done our like vital signs report and see that they're spending way, way, way more on staff than the average church? How many churches do you kind of walk into that have that as their metric, who say, we're way overstaffed and we feel that? It's always the opposite. It's, I can't believe we're overstaffed. It doesn't feel like that. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Second key breakdown, I think, in this phase, especially in a matrix organization, not a surprise, is decision-making rights. So who gets to make what decision? That gets muddy, and there's tensions, and a lot of times you see those tensions fall along the fault lines of campus teams and central teams, and dotted line people are making solid line decisions, and vice versa, and like church staffers are very relational. And a lot of times, relational people have a really hard time having difficult conversations with one another. Because they just feel like it's going to threaten the relationship. And so you feel tension or lack of clarity around some of these decision-making rights, but rather than just kind of going and solving those and let's kind of wrestle these to the ground, and let's document some decision-making rights even, you just watch relational tension build up until a pastor maybe gets sick of it and he just kind of drops a bomb and says, you make this decision and you make this decision, and it doesn't make anything better. But man, documenting decision-making rights, working on how we make decisions is a big one. Third breakdown is a lot of times at this phase, you're going to feel the pressure of wanting more central support but not really having the resources to spend on it.
Mm-hmm.
And churches sometimes they don't look at that as a yellow light. They just kind of green light all the way through that, and they build this massive central team that's too big too early. And then what kind of happens as a result of that is you have a lot of people that want to manage ministry, but not a lot of people that want to do it. And like you see in a lot of, for-profit side of things, you can almost build this like middle management apparatus as a church where people are kind of creating processes and creating ministry strategies and having meetings and then you're saddling your 2 or 3 campuses with this large central organization that they're not prepared and probably don't even need.
Yeah.
That's another one. And finally, some churches will do this. They'll hire a campus pastor for the original location a little too early.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden we have similar to the third one. You kind of have just too many cooks in the kitchen before you actually need it.
Yeah. Paul, so Jesse mentioned the decision rights there. And I want to double down on that because I think for churches at 2 or 3 locations, this is such a critical kind of part of their journey. This can become an incredible pain point or something that frees them up to continue to expand and grow when they get it right. So where have you seen decision rights confusion create friction between campus and central when churches get to this stage?
Yeah, Sean, it's actually an incredibly common point of friction in multi-site churches in this phase, specifically when you go from 1 location to 2, you still got people wearing like what Jesse was talking about, 2 hats, so to speak, like the worship leader at the first location is kind of centrally supporting the worship leader at the second one and so on. And the benefits of the structure is that all the organizational knowledge and influence can be almost like organically leveraged across sites. So that's kind of like easy. But when you go from 2 to 3, it gets more difficult because it's hard to be in 2 places at once, much less 3, right? And and it's difficult to coach what you don't see. So maybe you've got a worship leader at the 3rd location who doesn't always land like center of the bullseye, right? But maybe isn't being monitored or frequently coached as promptly as the 2nd worship leader was when it was just 2 locations. So that's one area, right? In a 3 campus scenario, you start to see more campus staff kind of move off of center of what your church's core strategy or brand is. And if you don't have good systems and structures to catch those and help train or redirect, you've got some bumpy decision-making rights conversations coming your way. The second one is not so much directional, it's more process-oriented. And so what I mean by that is this: how many people have to weigh in and buy in before a decision can be made at your church? Like, what do I have the right to just decide on my own as a campus pastor or as a student pastor at a location before I have to run it up the chain to my campus pastor or check in with my central counterpart? Like, that's what we're talking about when we say decision-making rights, like, or even run up to the senior leadership team or the board. And so here's the weird thing most people don't intuitively get. Generally speaking, as you grow, you're going to need to drive decision-making rights down the organization. So more people further down the org chart should be empowered to make higher level decisions. And that sounds counterintuitive and it sounds scary, but it's true. Because if you allow all of the decisions to flow up in the organization, get ready for a bottleneck of decisions and fatigue by people at the top. You're basically training everybody on staff to come and bring all of the decisions up to the senior leadership team. And then it slows everything down. Whether you got to decide, whether it happens in a lobby or what's communicated in a host moment from the platform or what happens on social media or how much money I can spend. Each of these kinds of things sounds exhaustive, but they need clear expectations set for who gets to make what decision.
I would assume, too, if all of those decisions have to rise to the top all the time, Paul, that some of your best leaders are going to leave, too.
100%. I mean, if you're basically saying, hey, I want to control everything, because essentially that's what that is. That may not be the sentiment behind it, but that's the function of what's behaved. That's how people feel further down the line. And so you've got to give young leaders runway. You've got to give people runway to make decisions.
So Jesse, you have a unique perspective here because you were a campus pastor at one time, and now you sit in that lead pastor seat. So I wonder, just in your perspective on both sides of those roles, what did you do what was the work that you had to do to reduce that friction that exists between campus and central team?
Yeah, we launched our first multi-site campus in 2010, so 16 years ago. And I pastored our very first one. And so I could probably share a lot more about how I contributed to the problem than I did than I did solve it. But at my best, I would say when I was a campus pastor, and we were kind of learning our way into multi-site. At my best, I encouraged like direct personal conversations. Hey, if you don't feel like you're being supported, or you don't feel like you're being heard by your central counterpart or the sending location or whatever, it's your job to like talk to them. This isn't a venting session to complain about them. And a lot of times your second location, your first multi-site campus, they were on the same team together. They've got a pre-existing relationship. You're sending people that you already know to a different location. And so you have a responsibility, even though there's a few miles of distance now, to still steward those relationships. And I think also in that campus pastor role, consistently inviting your central, even if they're just two hat people, consistently inviting them. You got to get over to our campus. You got to get over. You got to see the environments. You have to be here on a Sunday morning. You can't just, support from a distance. Number two, and then probably thirdly, as a campus pastor anyways, you do have a responsibility to advocate for your campus. It is very easy, and it's not always intentional, but it's very easy for that original location, that sending location, to kind of consider itself as both, the original sending location, but also kind of the mothership, which is a bad word to use in multi-site.
Yes, it is.
And a lot of times, unless they have an ambassador from the second location who is there advocating for what this campus needs, unintentionally, a lot of times they'll get overlooked. So I did that. I also served as a multi-site director, and I was a central ministry director. I led worship and production for a time, and so on the central side of things, I remember every once in a while having to remind our central team that we existed for our campuses. We exist because we have campuses. They don't exist for us.
Yeah.
We exist for them. And so a lot of times, in the normal course of just doing ministry and trying to do this mission together, a central team can kind of feel like annoyed by a campus, or, oh, they're always doing their own thing, or they're not doing what we asked them to do, blah, blah, blah. And you can kind of get paternalistic, about like these people, are these people an annoyance to your workday? Have you forgotten the only reason you have a job is because they exist? And as harsh as that might sound, sometimes it's a needed corrective. Central people in this phase can start to feel like their job is to be a policeman, or babysitters, or just trying to get people to follow a process and getting on people. And listen, you're a keeper of our ministry. And what our goal is to ensure that these ministries that we're keeping, that we're holding, are producing fruit at the places that we're doing them. And in order for you to really understand and see that, you got to get out there and you got to remember and just kind of serve the people at these locations that are doing the ministry.
All right, so we're going to wrap up this section and move on to strategic growth. But before we do, in your workbook, I want you to take that and list the top 2 areas where you need the most clarity right now. It could be structure. It could be the decision rights that we talked about. It could be staffing. Maybe it's some of your systems and how you work together. Or maybe it's the culture that you have at your church. Write down the top 2, take a minute to reflect, and then we'll be back with phase 3, strategic growth. right, Paul. So now we're talking about churches in that kind of 4 to 6 location stage of their multi-site journey. What's unique about this phase? What leadership shift specifically needs to happen when a church gets to 4 to 6 locations?
Yeah, once you've grown to a church with 4 or 6 locations, there's some shifts that do happen, Sean. First and most of all, your staff are back to singular roles. No more dual hats, right? You've grown to a size where you have campus staff and you have central service staff. Now, of course, this might not apply to you if you're launching smaller location in a more rural context, but larger multi-site churches, they're launching larger sites, which typically get you back to singular roles. And your church has grown to a point where you have a high reliance on volunteer leaders, not just volunteer team members. Really big difference. Some key role changes happen here as well. Typically, where you're hiring a multi-site director, like Jesse mentioned, he kind of served in that role in his church on a senior leadership team for a season. So all of the campus pastors were reporting to him. And this is also this phase where you're installing a campus pastor at that original location. So again, to answer your question, what leadership shifts need to happen in the strategic growth phase? There's some structural things that happen. You see where you move from doing the leading, like from shepherding to ranching. For example, on a weekend, staff should be mingling and meeting people, not working behind a desk or running a kid's room or holding a door. That's what volunteers should be doing. Not because volunteers are doing the ministry of the staff, but because the staff are inviting the church to not just come to church, but actually be the church. So staff are focused on identifying, equipping, and raising up volunteers and volunteer leaders. And so by this point, you should have systems and decision rights clarified so that you aren't operating on personalities or the unique gifting of or talent of particular staff members. If your ministry still is relying upon a specific person, you probably haven't done a good enough job of designing systems or your ministry playbook. Because everything you've built needs to be able to scale. And when you start getting past 4, 5, 6 campuses, there's a scale of all that. So, and if you make all these shifts well, this is where you'll end up experiencing that flywheel. Your staffing ratios really begin to start taking serious ground, because once your systems and decision rights are clear, you've got a good playbook. There isn't a need to add more central team members to your team now, because you're just staffing at campuses. So the campus, your staff begins shifting much more towards campuses, and you may occasionally add a central team member, but not as frequently. And let me just add this real quick, because I work with a lot of multi-site churches on their staffing structure side of things. A structure that's not well designed for this phase can actually be a reason you stall. So if you sense a lot of tension on your teams around responsibility and authority, my guess is you have a structure challenge that needs to be worked out. So when churches are structured really well in this phase of multi-site, they're not reshuffling the deck with every campus launch. The right ministry lanes and responsibilities have already been clarified.
Yeah, that's good. Jesse, what are the most important, like either systems or rhythms that you'd encourage leaders to build before they add the next campus in this phase when there are 4 to 6 locations?
Well, I probably don't have a ton to add from the organizational side of things. I thought Paul did just a great job kind of capturing that. But what I would add, probably from our own journey as a church, when we were walking through 4, 5, and 6 campuses, this is where we saw a lot of like spiritual cracks in our foundation. And kind of looking back, I think the reasons why are pretty obvious. When you're at this level of campuses, you're just pretty spread out. You're more spread out than you used to being, geographically for sure. You've got more locations to kind of fit into your calendar and places to go, and even just from a literal head count, there's just more. And what that means, I think it's more difficult to protect and promote spiritual health, emotional health, relational health, and if we said this a little bit more negatively, it's a lot more difficult, I think, to detect quickly unhealth. I think it's very easy in this phase for that to kind of stay under the radar. And so I would say, if you don't have a clearly articulated set of expectations on not just, character, but like, how do people own their spiritual health at your church? What do you have in terms of attentional plan and supporting people around taking Sabbaths, monthly retreat days, sabbaticals, mental health counseling, accountability relationships. I mean, there's just things that are true at every growth stage. Don't get me wrong, but necessary, proactive, preventative spiritual care at this phase is pretty important. You just can't monitor that in the same way at 4 to 6 as you could at 1 to 3.
I'm really glad you brought that up. It's so important, obviously, but something that doesn't get talked about or addressed a lot of times in terms of strategy. So for leaders to have that awareness, especially from your experience, is really helpful. What does it look like when you think about culture, Jesse, coming back to you? What does it look like to kind of protect the culture intentionally, especially when you're multiplying leaders and you're multiplying communication lines, and also I would say in addition to that, you're not in proximity to each other all the time. That makes it harder, right? So what does that look like? How can church leaders do that?
Well, let's first maybe, I don't know, like name some of the skepticism that I think we bring a little bit to this kind of culture question. You know, Sean, you and I are about the same age. You remember demotivational posters? Do you remember those?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You know, like
I like the snarkiness on those.
Yeah,
Yes.
like the corporate, entities of the 90s would have these inspirational posters. It'd be like teamwork,
Uh-huh.
It was a funny take on that, but a lot of times in the cliche of that, you get kind of the kernel of truth. And so I think one of those is you do have to articulate your culture, meaning you got to write it down. You got to document it.
Mm-hmm.
People have to know, who are we? What are we shooting for? What's expected? What is our staff? What are the things that we value? What are our staff behaviors? Like people have to know what those things are, and you got to talk about it, So articulate it, number one. Number two, obviously articulating it is not enough. It's not enough to put it on a poster and put a, inspirational picture. You have to model this. Like it has to be true of you and how you operate and what you love and what you value as a staff and certainly as a leadership team. It cannot be aspirational only, right?
Yeah.
So articulate it, model it, and then number three, and this is the boring but necessary part of organizational leadership, especially at a scale of 4 to 6 campuses. You have to know how to operationalize this. Here's what I mean by that. How do these values, behaviors, culture, how do you support these in your meeting structures and your meeting templates even? Does it make their way into your all staff? Does it make their way into your one-on-ones, into your volunteer huddles, into your vision documents that you pull out? Okay. So that's pretty important. Do these things make their way into your performance management system? Have you made these things behavioral and concrete in a way that you can hold people accountable to it? Culture I know is kind of a fuzzy thing and it's kind of a feely thing and whatever, right? Mm-hmm. But you can't just say, well, you don't fit the culture here. No, like help me understand why I don't, or vice versa.
Right.
Boy, they really get our culture. Okay, what does that mean? Right?
Yeah.
Can you embed these things into your hiring processes? I mean, do people who are looking to work at your church, do they know that this is the kind of culture because they can interact with it in those kinds of ways? And of course, the other things like communications, decor, newsletters, marketing, your sermons, those are some of the more low-hanging fruit. But I think trying to operationalize those in those kinds of ways at this scale and phase is pretty important.
Yeah. I was actually just with Pastor Sean C., who leads Athens Church down in Athens, Georgia. We've known Sean for quite a while, worked with his church since 2019. Paul, you're still working with Sean's church. And he told me, one of the most helpful things that we've done in our journey with them is help them capture and document their culture, their staff, their culture shaping behaviors for their staff. And he said it has been so important and helpful for how he leads the team. And one of the cool things is he said one of the ways they're using it now is every year they have a culture awards ceremony. And it's kind of like the Oscars. The host he dresses up in a suit. And they give away awards based around those culture shaping behaviors and the people on their team who embody them. I just thought, what a great way to reinforce these are the non-negotiables to being part of the Athens church team. And that should be true for any church team. So brilliant move by Sean. All right. So before we move on to the last section, going to give you just about 60 seconds here. And I want you to answer the question, are you still operating on heroics, meaning really one person or personality kind of driven systems and strategies? Or have you documented your systems and your decision rights that scale to all of your locations? So take about 60 seconds, write down one system that you need to focus on strengthening next, and then we'll be back with the last phase, what we call consolidation. Okay, so Paul, we're moving on now, thinking about churches that, they might have 7, 8, 9 locations. Some churches even more than that. I mean, we've got churches that we work with that have more locations than even that. So when a church reaches this phase, what tends to break down if leaders haven't made an adjustment from where they've been to now where they are and where they're going?
Yeah, I think first of all, it's important for me to pick up where Jesse left off at the end of the last section. I think when this comes to mind, you're leading 7+ locations. First thing you have to keep your eye on is sustaining your culture at all of your campuses. You've heard us say people transfer culture or carry culture. At this size, you don't have as many staff gatherings as you used to. You're regionally spread out further. You're probably not all officing together anymore. You've added a lot of new team members over the years who were not around with you when you were a smaller church. They kind of woke up on third base and they didn't go through the journey of getting all the way around the bases, so to speak. And so you have to think through, how do we continue to embed our culture at each of these locations? And it has to be, like what Jesse said, it has to be intentional, and you can't assume it's happening. In fact, I wanted to make sure I mentioned this. Our team recently put together a resource designed to help churches think this through, that's on our resource hub. So if you're a part of our tribe, you can find that on our resource hub. So secondly, hopefully you've developed a good muscle of measuring campus health and setting expectations of what success looks like. So just like your overall church is somewhere on the church life cycle, each of your campuses is on a church life cycle somewhere as well, and needs different leadership approaches in different seasons. Leadership, I say this often, is a lot like parenting. Different kids in different phases need something different from mom and dad, and often different approaches because of different personalities even. And so while there's some science and principles in play, there is some wisdom and art needed and all that. So this is where breaking down organizational goals for your reach strategy and your discipleship strategy, and ensuring each campus understands what their part is to play in that whole thing, this is really important. The work of the strategic leadership team with input from the campus pastors. Like if you don't clarify what wins look like, then every campus is going to come and define that for themselves. Right? So, and as you add locations, don't lose sight of the foundation that Multisite's built around what all of our locations have in common, not what's distinctive about each location. Yeah. So if you're beginning to think and starting to hear language about the distinctiveness of each location, if the campus pastors are coming together and like, well, at my campus, my people are more like this, and in my community, be careful. You might want to start planning for how you can launch those locations into independent churches or a network. And so you got to focus on what you guys have in common, not what's distinctive. And then finally, and this is more practical, regionalization, or what I would say player coach, structurally is really common at this phase, that you shift back to a player coach model. So where regionally a campus pastor may report to the multi-site director who's on the senior leadership team, but then that campus pastor may coach 2 or 3 other campus pastors in that region due to span of care limitations. So this is also true with other roles like kids pastors, student pastors. So you start to see that begin to happen structurally at this phase.
That's really good, Paul. I've seen and talked to a number of churches that, you mentioned this, don't really have a great system for measuring campus health and setting campus goals and contextualizing that by campus. But I think an outcome of that is that your campus pastors don't know if they're winning or not. And so as a leader, they'll start to fill in the gaps with their own ideas of what that looks like. And then central teams, SLTs, lead pastors can be a bit frustrated by that. So if you don't have a good process for that, that's what our work will help you do. Paul, I know you do this at your church as well. I've seen you in your charts as you go through this. There is a way towards health and really defining success at those campuses. So if that's a need, definitely contact us. Jesse, what are the signs that you've seen when a church needs to pause in this consolidation phase? And really what I mean is like, how do they know when it's time to really focus on how they're organizing, what their systems are, their communications across campuses, just kind of those internal systems before they get to adding another campus? Because I think that's a key question here. How do we know when to focus on us? And then how do we know it's the right time to push play on what's next?
Well, full disclosure, the church that I lead, this is right where we're at. So I could just kind of pull back the curtain and talk about our problems now.
Okay. Sounds good.
But some of this I think is it's pretty universal, and it's you're going to feel some of this stuff I think at almost every phase. But these are especially, I think, especially felt when you're 7 campuses and trying to look ahead. One I think is if you're feeling decision-making fatigue. And again, I know that's true. Boy, that's true for all of us almost every single day. But at the scale of 7, and if you feel like God's calling you to go 8, 9, 10 beyond, you're going to need to modernize systems in order to automate some of these decisions, because not every single decision needs to be made by you personally or by your leadership team directly. Paul shared this a little bit earlier. Driving decision-making down the organization is really important. The question you have to ask, though, at this scale is, can you trust people 1 and 2 levels down with decisions that for maybe years were executive team level decisions? And you're going to need to be able to do that, or at least develop people into those roles so that they can do that. Because there's a next bank of decisions that you're going to need to make, especially as a senior leadership team, about how do we become a church that launches at this scale. Number one. I think number 2, again, this one's pretty common at I think almost every phase, but I think when your desire to grow outpaces how you've invested and developed organizationally. What are the ones that you can kind of see this usually the most clearly, easy and often in? Generosity. Have you really discipled people into the kind of generosity that's going to be needed for you to launch at this scale? I was just on a call today with some of our executive pastor, like one of our executive pastor cohorts. And, one of their stories was, running a capital campaign, and over the course of that capital campaign, attendance went down and we kind of barely hit our mark, or fell a little bit below what our goal was. And you just kind of get, I don't know, it's like a shot across the bow of your church where you go, oh man, have we discipled our people into understanding that there's this movement, that it's not just about their campus, it's not just about what's right in front of them, that we're a part of this movement of churches that's trying to reach more and more communities, or more and more parts of our community, right? That's a really difficult thing to cast vision for, to help people understand, even though you're in a particular part of the community, you're a part of a church that's much larger. Have you developed that kind of identity and discipled your people into that kind of identity? Similar with like leadership development, a pipeline, discipleship into the mission, the board oversight structures. It just takes a lot of development in order to get people to wrap their minds around what it's like to be a church at that scale. And then finally, the last thing I would say, that you may need to consolidate is if you're seeing kind of like a high staff turnover, a lot of churning there, or if you're starting to have difficulty like attracting talent from the outside, there may be something there that you need to kind of deal with and allow to become more healthy so that you can continue to launch.
Those are really good indicators. I actually hadn't thought about the high staff turnover before. Now that you said that, gosh, that makes a lot of sense. I'm going to use that and claim it was my idea, Jesse. All right.
Perfect.
Okay, good. Paul, so multi-site ministry doesn't make things less complex, right? It makes things more complex. It's worth it, but it's more complex, and complexity continues to grow, especially as you're at this stage. What do you think leaders, as they come into this, are underestimating?
Oh, goodness. A lot. You don't know what you don't know
Yeah.
at every level here. And it's okay. You almost need a little bit of optimistic naivety to want to jump into, what the future is.
Sure.
If we all knew what we were saying yes to and the Lord called us to ministry, we might want to counted the cost a little bit more.
Yeah.
But that's needed and okay, and it's good. It's part of what it is. There's three things that popped into my head, Sean, when you're talking about this, that I think we underestimate at this phase of the game. Fundamentally, at every layer here, but I think it's really important to circle back to this at this stage of it. Campus pastors are an extension of their senior pastor. So understanding what your senior pastor is convicted about, like legitimately, like if we don't do it, I think we wouldn't be obeying God. What's your senior pastor really convicted about? What's he passionate about? What's important to him? What a cultural violation looks like, and the posture through which their lead pastor lives. They need to really understand the heart of their lead pastor, because they're an extension of their senior pastor.
Yeah.
In that location. I think at this stage of ministry, things can drift towards becoming over systemic. Because, let's face it, at 7+ locations, you've experienced some level of success, and you know what works. You've been able to replicate multiple times over. Way to go. But the danger is staff can be lulled into just running the ministry play and parroting ministry practices instead of actually being trained and developed how to think.
Yeah.
So senior staff have a responsibility at this phase to really remind themselves to help the team understand the underpinning principles that drive how we make decisions and the why behind our practices, not just go do this. So I think and that's a development issue. We have to have a development mindset. We got to help people understand why we do what we do.
Yeah.
And then finally, success really is the enemy of growth, even in a church. So never stop experimenting, never stop learning. And I'm not advocating for wholesale change for the sake of change, but as leaders, we may get bored with something and be tempted to innovate it or change it. But remember, the goal at this stage of the game is ministry effectiveness, not ministry novelty. So there's some things we need to stay with, some things we need to experiment with, and leadership needs to understand the wisdom between the two of those things.
That's good. All right. So before we move on, I want to give you about 30 seconds to write down and answer this question. What does health look like at each campus in your context? And do you have a shared, clearly communicated way to measure it right now? So about 30 seconds, use your workbook, and then we'll be back. Well, I just want to say thanks to everybody for joining us today. Really appreciate you taking your time to be here with us and to learn along with us. This content is highly important to us. We believe a lot in multi-site churches and believe that multi-site churches can be some of the healthiest and most effective churches. And so whether your church is considering multi-site for the first time, or you're already multi-site and considering expanding, we'd love the opportunity to help you in any way we can, whether it's through our content or some of our on-site consulting processes, Now, you may have listened to this webinar today and had several questions that came to mind that you'd like to get answered. We didn't have time for a live Q&A during today's event, but I am going to be offering personally a couple of open office hours. So these are Zoom calls just like this that you can register for and join us to ask whatever question you'd like to ask regarding multi-site strategy, no matter what phase of multi-site your church is in today. Both of those office hours calls will be next week, and we're going to send out more information about those in our follow-up email, along with the link to watch this video again. I know several of you commented you'd either like to watch this or share it with somebody else who wasn't able to join us today live. So look for that email coming out tomorrow with all of that information for you. And of course, if we can do anything in the future to help your church, whether it's on multi-site strategy, staffing, or organizational structure, or just clarifying your ministry plan going forward, we'd love to be of help. You can always reach us at theunstuckgroup.com. Thanks a lot for your time. Again, really appreciate that. Hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and we'll see you again on a future webinar.